Alright, so we're going to look at X and Y intercepts now. And let's determine first what they are. X-axis, Y-axis. And we're given a graph like this, and we'll just call that graph f of x, whatever f of x is. So there are a few things on this graph that are distinctive about this particular graph. And pause the video and look at it and tell me what is distinctive to you, what stands out, or think about it. So what stands out is that we have these 3 points along the x-axis. That's where it crosses or touches the x-axis. All right? So what about these 3 points do they all, what is distinctive about these 3 points? What do they all three have in common? They all have in common y, they all have common y values. Y is equal to 0 at each of these points. Y is equal to 0. Y is equal to 0. So that's telling us something. That's telling us that these are telling us our x-intercepts. All right. So this is a x-int. I'm going to call it x-int, x-int, x-int. All right. So anywhere the graph crosses the x-axis, that's an x-intercept. All right. And then there's it crosses the y-axis right there, and that is where x is equal to 0. That's where you find the y-intercept, where x is equal to 0. All right. So here's what we can say. We can say to find x-intercepts, we let y equal 0. And remember, y is the same thing as f of x. So if your function has f of x in there, then you just replace f of x with 0. And solve for x. And then if you have a y-intercept, or define the y-intercept, and I guess I should make these contingent on being plural, then you let the other variable be 0. So up here, to find the x, we let the y be 0. To find the y-intercept, we let the x be 0. So let x equal 0 and solve for y. Y or f of x. Remember, they're the same thing. All right, so let's look at an example or two. Find x and y ints. Ints just mean intercepts. And let's look at f of x. Start off with something kind of simple. X plus 2. We've looked at that a couple of times now. F of x is equal to x plus 2. All right, so trying to find the x and y intercepts. Let's just start with the x. All right. Pick one. It doesn't matter which one you start with. I'm going to start with the x. So here's how I'll do it. X int like this. And then I'm going to just write down what I'm doing as I go along. So that way nothing gets kind of overlooked. So to find x-intercept, what do I need to do? What do I need to let equal 0? I need to let the other value equal 0. So I'm trying to find the x, then I need to let the y be 0. Let y equal 0. Or f of x, it's the same thing. So I'm gonna write my function here, and you don't necessarily have to do this step, I just do it right now so you got all your bearings about you, or so you can find them. So go ahead and write it for now until you get the hang of this. So let y equal 0, so remember, or f of x. So now this f of x becomes 0, and that's equal to x plus 2. Now I just solve this for x. I subtract 2 from both sides, so I get minus 2 is equal to x. And convention, and a little less confusing, is you usually want the x or the variable on the left side. So I'm just going to flip the 2. X is equal to negative 2. And that's fine. Either one would be acceptable to me, but on the exams and the homework, the computers might be a little weird. So this is not your answer, all right? When you're finding an x-intercept or a y-intercept, your answer is a point. It's not just x equals 2, because x equals 2 is a whole line at x equals 2. So you need to write the point. So you know your x value is negative 2, comma, and what's my y value? Well, we defined what our y value was up here. We said it was going to be 0. So that is my x-intercept, and that would be your answer. All right, now it's the same thing for the y-intercept. The only difference is we're going to let the x equal 0 now. Let x equal 0. Then I'm going to write my function again below it, just because it's good habit so I don't forget something, or I don't make a silly mistake. So now I replace 0 everywhere there's an x. So I get f of 0 is equal to 0 plus 2. And remember, this is still just treated as y. So f of 0 is equal to 2. That means y is equal to 2, or y equals 2. All right? Remember, this is not your answer. This is a line of y equals 2. I'm looking for an intercept. I'm looking for the point at which it crosses the y-intercept. So the point, what is my x value? I told it to be 0, and I found it to be, the output to be 2 there. So that would be your y-intercept. All right, let's look at part B. Let's call it g of x is equal to x squared minus 16. X squared minus 16. All right, start with the x-intercept. And in fact, I want you to try this by yourself. Follow the same steps, pause it, and work through it, then come back and follow along with me. So here I let y equal 0. I'm finding x, I let y be 0. I'm finding y, I let x be 0. It's always the other one. And then I'm going to write my function here. Just as good habit. Now I'm replacing y with 0. So this becomes 0. This is x squared minus 16. Now I add 16 to both sides. So I get 16 is equal to x squared. And most people like these flip-flops, so I'll go ahead and do that. But you can still continue working just there if you wanted. So I'm just going to rewrite it as x squared is equal to 16. All right, now how do I get rid of that square? Well, if you're squaring something, to get rid of it, you have to square root it. So I square root both sides, just like this. And over here, a square root of a square becomes x, and the square root of 16 is 4. All right, so I did everything right here, except at the very end. I made a tiny little mistake that I forgot. Do you know what that mistake is? All right, you have to be careful. When you introduce a square root, like we did here, you have to account for the plus and the minus of that number. So we have to account for the plus and minus of 4. Why is that? Just so you can help wrap your head around it. So let's say I had x squared is equal to 16. What I want to do is I'm going to plug in 4 and negative 4 in there for x, and I want to see if they actually equal 16. So let's do 4 first. 4 squared is equal to 16. So that one checks out. Now I want to plug in negative 4 squared. Well, what does that equal? That equals 16. So both of those are the correct answer. You have to be careful because we had this squared in here, and when you're squaring something, the negative doesn't matter anymore. And when you introduce that square root and you strip out that squared, you have to make sure to account for both the plus and the minus. So, my answer here, this is not my answer. Remember, these are lines. These are x equals 4 and negative 4 vertical lines. I want the points. X-intercepts are points. So my x is 4, comma, and my y is, I told it to be 0, and negative 4, comma, 0. And then the y-intercept, I'm finding y, I let the other be 0. Let x equal 0. And then just for good practice, I'm going to write my function. Now I replace all the x's with 0. So f of 0 is equal to negative 16. So that means, or you can say y is equal to negative 16. Alright, remember it's a point. I said my x value was 0, and I was getting an output negative 16. So there would be my x and y intercepts.